I did. I moved to everybody down.
What?
I just moved.
Nancy doesn't want to sit next to me anymore. So.
Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Here.
Mr. Kraus?
Here.
Mr. McGill?
Here.
Mrs. Meany? Here. Mr. Palunas?
Here.
Mr. Russo?
Here.
Mr. Scott?
Here.
Okay, there are no changes to the agenda, and the announcements are as published on the agenda. Are there any comments from the audience? Any comments from the audience? Any comments from the audience? Seeing there are none, we'll bring it back to the dais for the approval of the minutes of August 28th, 2017.
Move to approve as submitted.
Is there a second? Mr. Kraus, roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Abstain.
Okay, then we have the minutes from September 18th, 2017. Is there a motion to approve?
Move to approve as submitted.
Is there a second? Mr. Kraus, roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, brings us to Planning Commission consent, item number 1.
An application was received for property located at 33000 Solon Road for a Verizon wireless cell tower. Site plan approval to modify and update existing antennas and equipment. The Planning Commission recommended approval contingent upon approval by the Police Department of the signal interference report.
Okay, Mr. Palunas?
Move to approve the site plan as recommended by the Planning Commission, contingent upon approval by the Police Department of the signal interface report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
John?
Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, item number 2.
An application was received for property located at Aylshire Drive and Aurora Road from the Aylshire Homeowners Association for a 9.1 square foot sign area variance, which was approved, 0.6 foot sign width variance, which was approved, 0.8 foot sign height variance, and the Planning Commission approved it contingent upon execution of a license agreement prior to issuing a permit.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes, I'll move to approve all of the variances as approved by the Planning Commission, along with the contingency that was revised of the license agreement, which was negotiated between the law director and the president of the Homeowners Association.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. McGill? Any further?
Can I ask a question?
Further discussion? Mr. Scott?
Do we know when you're going to try to put this sign up?
Oh,
Before the snow starts flying?
All right, well, should this be done under suspension?
Not for planning
Not for
items.
planning.
Well, not for planning?
Right.
In a while, okay.
Okay. Any further discussion? Are you seconding, or you have a question?
No, just a comment.
Okay, Mr. Kraus.
Yeah, the Mike's here, and the homeowners association has been very patient, been trying to do this for a long time. It's an old sign, so I just want to thank everyone, Mr. Loby, Planning Commission, for accommodating them. I think it'll be a very attractive new sign for the association.
Okay, any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Brings us to correspondence, item number 3.
Correspondence was received from the planning director regarding policies and recommendations in regard to political speech signage.
Mr. Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the last City Council meeting, a request was made regarding potential legal issues and the policies that the city should be following regarding political signs. You should have all received a report, which I believe is in your packet, regarding this issue in detail. And tonight I'm going to give some, just go over the background very quickly, provide a couple of options that the city could consider. And hopefully, based on the report that you've read, you could see why the question of what our policy should be is a very important question. That's because the political sign regulations are one of the most unsettled areas in planning law in the nation right now. There's been multiple court cases, local cases, there's been Supreme Court cases, and basically the cases leave as many questions as they answer. They're not very clear. What we do know based upon these cases and what we can piece together is that political and religious speech are going to be protected more than commercial speech is by the courts. That's pretty much a given, that's settled. The Supreme Court has taken that to such an extent that they've said that any regulation of political speech, content speech, is going to be presumed to be unconstitutional on the face of it. So it's automatically presumed to be unconstitutional. The only way to prevail against the issue of it being presumed unconstitutional is to prove a compelling government interest. Unfortunately, the courts haven't described or defined what a compelling government interest is either. There's speculation that that could be traffic safety, that it could be aesthetics, but there's no direction at this time. I mean, common sense says that traffic safety will be one of those issues, but we just don't know right now. One common thread that goes through all these court rulings is that they basically say that if your political sign ordinances, if your political speech ordinances are more strict than any other ordinances that you have in the city, then you could potentially have a problem. Now that's a problem if you think about it, because a lot of communities allow billboards, okay? We allow electronic message boards. We allow 100 square foot wall signs in commercial areas. We allow 60 square foot freestanding signs. So basically what the courts are saying, some courts are saying, is that if you can't regulate political signs more strictly than that. It's not all over. There's still a lot of interpretation to go on, and I think we still have a leg to stand on to take stricter protections to protect the residents. But nobody knows for sure right now. Unfortunately, many cities are facing substantial monetary challenges to their ordinances, and these are ordinances that they've had on the books for decades that are common ordinances, political sign regulations that are common nationwide. And some folks are really getting hammered on that. One case, not the only case, but in one case I'm sure the law director will want to mention is Wagner versus Garfield Heights. That's the prominent case locally. But there's cases all over the country, and the particulars of each case are different. So that's some of the background. The report that you provided gave a couple of options that you could potentially follow, or the city could potentially follow, and we'll review those. Option number one would be simply enforce the ordinances as they are right now. We could do that. I think that in view of some of the particulars and specifics of the Supreme Court case and some of these other cases, it's probably not a good idea, that we should at the very least modify it. For instance, we require a 15-foot setback for political signs. No other district in the city requires, no other signs require 15-foot setbacks, so we can presume that would not be upheld. Plus, the 15-foot setback makes it so that on some properties a sign wouldn't even be visible. We regulate the number of issues. You can only have 4 election issues on your property. I think that wouldn't be upheld either. That's not an appropriate restriction of free speech. So that's option number one. I don't think it's much of an option. Option number two would be to enforce the minimum standards necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the residents. That would be an attempt to discern what the compelling government interest is. We have to assume that protecting health, safety, welfare is a compelling government interest. Those types of regulations might be no signs in the right-of-way, no signs blocking lines of sight, the number of signs. I think we could still regulate the number of signs per issue. We just can't regulate the number of issues. Square footage requirements. I think we can keep those. That actually is the current planning policy that we've been operating under, and I think that's probably what led to the question, what is the policy going to be? Doesn't guarantee that there's not going to be a lawsuit against the city. It's just taking the steps and focuses on trying to protect the rights of the residents to the extent possible. So you don't have signs everywhere, big signs blocking view within right-of-ways. That does bring us to option number 3. I'll call that the nuclear option. That's what that does is that would have us suspend all zoning enforcement of political signs. That's probably the safest option legally, and I know that that's a viewpoint that the law director would like to talk about tonight a little bit. But it is important to recognize that if we eliminate all political sign regulations, then we're limiting all regulations. That includes size, number, duration, electronic message boards, pole signs, basically everything goes. So those what I'd suggest would be the 3 options: enforce as we are, enforce the minimum ordinances necessary to try to address the compelling government interest requirement that the Supreme Court has established, or waive all requirements. So the planning department has provided you the Exhibit A. That was the recommendation, but I know the law director is concerned about some of the financial damages that the city can experience. So if nobody has any questions for me, then I would turn it over to the law director at this point.
Very quickly, I think what Mr. Franklin outlined is correct. The legal pendulum has swung totally against any regulation. There's cases in Lake County, Summit County, Cuyahoga County, federal courts. Free political speech is one of the more protected speeches, more than free commercial speech. Religious speech and political speech are so protected that the last 10 cases all came down in favor of the person that said, I have greater rights than the local self-government rights of my charter authority. There's attorneys now looking for cities to sue because it's such a fertile area to make law. In fact, there's a group out of Cincinnati that their whole business is looking for cities that try and enforce this simply to sue because they get attorney's fees. There was the case of the city of Garfield Heights. They just paid, in addition to their attorney's fees, their insurance premiums, costs, they just paid $325,000, negotiated down from $500,000, and they had to sue their insurance company because it was non-insurable to pay a good portion of it, and the city of Garfield Heights didn't have any money to do so, and it was all over one little political sign. This took about a 3-year battle, and they lost it as they went up. And the U.S. Supreme Court did come down with the Reed case. The interesting thing is that we've had in seminars the law school professor that was the expert on behalf of the city of Garfield Heights, who testified that they have the ability to regulate to some extent, similar to what Rob had mentioned, says that the courts continually say you have the right to enforce, but they don't tell you what you can enforce, and the last 10 times they got shot down. I asked one simple question of this law school professor on this particular issue, who was paid a lot of money to be the expert. Why don't you draft an ordinance based upon all your legal knowledge, all your legal expertise, that you feel is enforceable? His answer was, I can't. So we're caught in that catch-22, that you're allowed to do it, but nobody knows how to draft one to do it. And every time somebody does try and enforce it, they get legally sanctioned, big time. So I'm in favor of nuclear number 3. It's the cautious thing to do. I'm always cautious in that regard. It might go against some of the sensibilities of many people on this dais or in the public, but that is my advice. I have given that advice out previously, and that is the reason why, as outlined. So based upon the legal condition, I don't know how you're going, if you're going to be challenged. The last 10 plus cities that tried it have all lost. So that is my recommendation, and I'm open to questions, as is Mr. Franklin.
Mr. Palunas?
Thank you, Mr. Law Director.
Thank you, Mr.
I
Plum.
think we can go through. Eddie Kraus and I can have a debate on strict scrutiny and medium
Correct.
scrutiny, and maybe we can bring other, and we can have a little debate here over that. But I think that I understand why you're recommending item number 3 here, but I think that Mr. Franklin brought up a very good point with safety. and we've had a lot of signs that have gone in right-of-ways. I know last week I called Mr. Franklin about a couple companies that put signs in for painting and for debris removal and other things that were, on right-of-ways and on sides of roads and other things. So I think we still, no matter what the law is, I think we're still going to have the ability to regulate on a safety basis, on a health, safety, and welfare basis.
If you're
So I
talking
think-
commercial content, yes, I have no problem with that. Painting signs, et cetera, I have no problem with that. But don't touch the political sign. Commercial free speech is not as protected as, political free speech.
What about a
It's
political
protected, but I don't mind regulating there. You touch political, I got a real problem. So
What
that's
about
the
a political
distinction.
sign? What about a political sign that's put on a city right of way, or is put on in a drainage ditch where it's causing a problem for water flow, or if it's put near a stop sign and you can't see over it, around it? Then we have an issue that Mr. Franklin brought up, and I think that has nothing to do with the content. That has nothing to do at all with the content of the sign. It doesn't matter what the sign is, if it's political, if it's commercial, or anything. If it's blocking an intersection or blocking a sign or blocking a drainage ditch, not on someone's property, I think there's a problem with that.
I understand that if there was one of those big signs that would block the view, I get that one. But it can't be an across-the-board enforcement of any one of those in there. I'm just telling you. And you better have a real compelling reason, and you better paper your file as to why you did it. And I get that, Mr. Plumas. There's got to be some reasonableness, but it can't be just across-the-board enforcement. That's my advice. So I'm agreeing with you in minor part.
Okay,
but not
Mr.
in
Scott.
totality.
Mr. Lobby, what about just keeping him out of our property in the right-of-way? I mean, we
There's
obviously
no case law.
lost the timing of it because there are a lot of signs around yet from two people that I am very friendly with. But our property, doesn't that assume that people could assume that we're supporting whatever the candidate is on the sign if we allow it in our right-of-way?
Well, we don't own the right-of-way. It's just a right-of-way. The property owner owns the property. It's just a right-of-way. And again, Mr. Franklin and I debated that. There's not a case on moving it out of the right-of-way, but all the cases, if you touch it, there's a possibility. So that's why I'm being extremely cautious and saying it's a short period of time, don't do it unless there is an extreme situation. That is, I think, option number 2 that Rob has in his thing. I'm just cautiously not in favor of it because that hasn't been tested. You would think that is something that, how can anybody complain about that? How can they get damages on it? I'm just a little cautious because nobody can write them well. But there is that policy, and some cities do enforce it to get it out of the right-of-way. I get that. Now, how much you want to do, if you want to do that, all right, but with reservations from the law department.
Anybody else?
Well, I think then we would be like our neighbors to the south. There would be 85 signs in a corner because everybody wants to put something on a corner. And you say that's something we have to live with?
Well, that's something that a lot of cities are just living with. I'm not just here, but a lot of places. I mean, most law directors are taking that position. And again, if you do and you want to enforce it, I get it, trust me. Do I like it personally? That's not the point. Does it look bad? Yes, I get all that. But you got to remember, we will be in a federal court that protects federal political speech. So that's all my cautionary comments are.
Nancy?
I'm not disagreeing with you, John. Just-
I just want to make sure, Rob, I want to make sure I didn't understand you. If we do 3, that doesn't, all it includes, are we suspending all?
All regulation. Could go in the right-of-way, could be any height, it could be lit, could be electronic message board, any number of signs,
For political speech,
for political speech only,
limited
yes.
to political
Okay,
speech.
I just want to make sure I get that
Okay.
right. So that's
Good.
just political.
But it could be all year long,
All
too.
year.
So you can put a 20-square-foot neon sign in someone's residential yard, and that would be okay.
Under that, under option number 3, yes.
Unless you have a really health, safety, and welfare visual issue.
Well, that's in the eye of the beholder sometimes.
Mrs. Meany?
So Tom, if we leave it the way it is, because personally I think it's worked okay for the last number of years, your concern is that it will, if we just go with what our present ordinance is, what's your,
I don't like it. The only thing I'd even mildly object to is the moving it out of the right-of-way. Anything else, I'm not in favor of touching. And look at the last 10 cases. If you read the first fact pattern, you would say the court's never going to come down in that favor. The court comes down in favor of the political speech. So that's all I'm telling you.
Mr. Couture?
Mr. Loby, you had indicated that there is a movement in the law world to sue municipalities for violating political free speech. And specifically, I think you mentioned that there's a law firm in Cincinnati that kind of specializes in that.
Mm-hmm.
Could you, I think you touched on it, I don't know in how much detail you had indicated that the city is leaving themselves open to monetarily being hurt by trying to restrict the political speech. Could you go over some of the instances where you feel that could, I think you mentioned something about we could be liable for the legal fees of.
Why do you think lawyers do this? I'm one, so I'm probably part of the problem. Whenever you attack a constitutional issue, and if the court agrees with you, they get their attorney's fees. Okay? So it's a constitutional issue, and the other side is successful, the court grants attorney's fees. Attorney's fees are not granted in American jurisprudence or Ohio jurisprudence except in very limited circumstances. Very limited. Those that are statutorily so nominated, okay, or if it's something that affects a constitutional right. So lawyers see something like this, the law is in their favor, they file a constitutional challenge to it, and if they're correct, they get their fees. That's just what happened in Garfield Heights. In fact, the lawyer, it was a little sign, they won the case, went to federal court, went to the Court of Appeals, Supreme Court came back down, they came down, and then they back at the trial court, and I just talked to the law director there, they just settled their case for like $300 plus or $400,000 of legal fees to the other side, not their expenses.
Okay, Mr. Couture, you had another question.
Okay, so I have a follow-up to that then. So it sounds like, from what you described, there is a significant liability financially that we could potentially have if the court deems that we have attempted to limit political free speech.
Correct.
Is that correct? Okay. And you use the term attorney's fees. Is there, I mean, obviously, attorneys are kind of like any other service. Some people charge more than others. And what determines, I guess, a reasonable rate?
The court determines that at the end. The attorney comes in and says what his experience is, what his average rate is, how much he's gotten in other matters. I think the attorneys in this particular case were in the $350 range.
Per hour.
Per hour, plus their costs. Okay? You're not going to get anybody for $100, $150, or $250. Anybody in this field is getting $250 to $400, I'm guessing, in that particular plan.
When you say costs plus their cost, are there costs of like meal expenses?
No,
and
expert fees, transcriptions, deposition costs, things of that nature.
And then a third follow-up question would be, does our insurance protect us financially in any way, shape, or form on that?
It may and may not, okay? The one in Garfield Heights, they had a fight with their own insurance company for insurability, okay? They had to challenge their own insurance company to
So
pick
it
up
is
the fee.
questionable.
And at the end, they made a settlement for the fees. Garfield Heights had to pay some in their insurance company, but they had to pay their lawyer to fight their insurance company. So you get into those costs and expenses. There's a
Okay.
good chance it will not all be covered by insurance.
So you're saying that the residents could be on the hook for a substantial amount of money?
The residents in Garfield Heights just paid out of their personal coffers, not their insurance coffers, for even some of the settlement for the attorney's fees. I don't know the split, but it was split mostly by insurance, but small portion was by
I've
the
got one
insurance,
question.
by the city itself.
But in order for that to
Doug,
work, go ahead.
Mr. Franklin, what is the current practice right now? As far as what, somebody calls in and makes a complaint, what has the planning department been doing?
Right, if there's a complaint, and they're usually about location in right-of-way. In the past, the policy had been to remove the sign, but aware of the legal climate right now, what the zoning inspector does is to move the sign back onto private property. On the private property issue, I just would point out is that the issue with sign regulation, and I think Tom would agree with this, is that you cannot discriminate in any way, shape, or form against political speech and religious speech. As far as the issue of putting signs in the right-of-way, no signs are permitted in the right-of-way, no structures are permitted in the right-of-way. The only thing that's permitted in the right-of-way are PUCO utilities and city utilities. So I would think that at least that, and I know what the law director's saying, that there's always a risk, but it seems to me at least taking them out of the right-of-way wouldn't be an issue. But that's how the enforcement. I'm sorry
And
for
so far that's
going
worked.
afield there, but yeah.
And that's worked for us.
It has worked. I think what Tom's concerned about is the other things in the ordinance. Kind of what that option 2 was kind of amending or adjusting our ordinance, not enforcing everything that's in it, kind of amending it as a policy for the time being until the dust settles on this, and we know what the courts are how they're going to advise, or what we can discern from those rulings, what we can do. I had a suggestion here, some of which, if we could have the overhead camera, I could show what an ordinance could perhaps look like. Maximum sign area, suggesting that stay as it is, 8 square foot for the permanent sign, 6 square foot for the temporary election sign. I know that Mr. Loby will. That's the current requirement. Mr. Loby might have concerns about that being arbitrary, or that we have commercial signs can be up to 40 square feet. Minimum setback from the right-of-way, I think that is that's a traffic safety issue, and I think most people believe, even the fellow that Tom said couldn't write the ordinance. I know I've read some things that he's written, and he believes that traffic safety will be one of the things that we'll be able to enforce, and that's a right-of-way issue. Maximum sign height, 4 feet. That's current ordinance and what's being enforced. Maximum sign duration may be erected 30 days before the relevant election. That might seem like a brave move, and maybe it is. But there are court cases that have actually upheld the duration requirement, that they did not strike that down. It's a case. It's not the case. Maximum number of election signs, election issues that are permitted signs. Currently, it's 4. I would propose that it be unlimited. Maximum number of signs per individual election issues. I'm suggesting 1. That would be in line with current commercial requirements, because you can actually have 2 signs in one instance, because you have a permanent sign and then you have a temporary election signs that you're allowed to put in 30 days before the election. Of all those, my recommendation would be to at least stick with outside of the right-of-way. The problem is, if you break free from it, as I said, you break free from it entirely. So it's going to be you could have a billboard in a residential area.
Okay, Bob, and then Doug.
I understand what the law director is saying, and I think that he's putting us on notice that there is a potential problem here, a potential issue. I think we need to take some action, but I don't think we should stop enforcement of everything because of safety, because of health of the residents, welfare of the residents. And what you have is, if you put it in, say, a drainage ditch and you put it down, it could act as a, to stop water flow and everything else. You put in a stop sign, and the actual side of the road is higher than the car, you might not be able to see, and then you could have an accident there. It's things like that. The duration that you said, that's a time, place, and manner restriction, so I think that would be okay for that to be put in there, and I think that we should have some protection for the city on it. Should we go back to item 1 with 128804, items 3 through D of the zoning code? With the decisions here, probably not at this point, but I think we should go with item number 2. I think item number 3 is just way way too much, because then we're just stopping everything, and then anything could go. You could have a neon sign in the yard, you could have a sign with illumination, but then we have the issue of the electrical code, then you have to deal with that type of thing, and I just think that item 2 is what I'd be in favor of, but I'm only one person up here.
And I do think this discussion is very good, because you're trying to prove, if you do regulate, you're trying to prove that you have a compelling government interest. So you're obviously putting a lot of thought into this, you're talking about it, you're spending a lot of time on it, and I think that helps a little bit at least.
Very much so.
Okay, Mr. McGill?
Thanks. Yeah, there used to be a concept called quiet enjoyment in terms of your property, that, you know, if we go with option number 3, we're going to be inundated with complaints from people. And I think, you know, from our standpoint, we have to represent all the residents here as well. Now, in order for a lawsuit like this to work, Tom, somebody within the city would have to file suit, correct? It has to be a resident.
I'm not sure of that.
I would
venture to say most probably,
I would
but
bet
the law
that.
has a very, very wide interpretation of interested party.
Well, I understand, but some
So, you know-
lawyer from Cincinnati comes up here and parks here for the afternoon. I don't think he has standing. Do you?
Not he alone.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So, in addition, which court would he have to file that within?
If they're smart, they go right to federal court.
Mm-hmm.
They could file it in common pleas, but they don't. Most of them go right to federal court.
Okay, if
Because
a
federal
suit-
judges interpret it a lot more stringently than maybe even common pleas judges do.
I understand that. Now, if it does go to federal court, does that presume that there's no opportunity for settlement, should somebody pursue that option?
Yeah. I mean, you should always consider settlement. I'm a big fan of settlement.
So, all right, so there are steps between somebody being annoyed at not being able to put a sign in a city right-of-way and ending up in federal court paying hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's various steps between here and there, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kraus?
Yeah, I agree with Bob. You know, there has to be some, you know, restrictions based upon, you know, the health and safety. And I understand Tom's position, but I do agree, there's got to be something there. Because it could be a health safety issue. And there's got to be some protection in those situations. So I would probably support number 2.
If it's a health and safety issue, not just across the board.
Right,
Unfortunately.
absolutely.
Fair enough.
Right.
Yep.
I'm okay with that too, but
Right.
so we're all clear.
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah,
Mr. Scott?
So what's 2 gonna look like?
It'll look like this, what I have here, this chart, which I'll send out to everybody. It would be the policy where essentially, again, maximum square foot sign area would be 8 square feet for the permanent sign, the sign you could have all year long, which is already allowed. 6 square feet for the temporary election signs, which is what the ordinances say now. May be located up to, but not within the street right of way. That is not in the ordinance right now. It is a 15-foot setback required right now, so that would be a differentiation from the,
Okay, and how will that be enforced?
it's going to be, it's how it's being enforced now.
So you're just gonna move it back onto property?
Yes.
Well, what if they didn't want it there to begin with? We're gonna put the onus on the
Well,
resident?
Yeah, and I know that issue came up. The problem is with that, and I did talk with the law director about that, the issue with that is, you know, it's a touchy situation for the city to get involved in, because it might be that one person in the household, maybe they said they didn't want the sign. Maybe somebody else wanted the sign, and then the city's going in and removing a sign that maybe somebody else wanted, which could put us into legal jeopardy. So it's a burden on the residents when it does happen. I don't think it happens too often. Hopefully it doesn't, but it would be the residents' responsibility to remove it. At least that's what I would recommend. If I think that's probably what the law director would recommend too, just because we don't have that visual of somebody from the city going in and removing a sign from the property that, you know, on the presumption.
Talking from the right of way.
Oh yeah, move it out of the right of way.
But
But it will move it back onto private property. Yes.
I think John's point is, if you're putting it on, if you're taking it out of the right-of-way, person didn't want it in their property, someone put it on the right-of-way, then you're putting it on the person's property, and then the person has to dispose of it or deal with the problem, is what John's saying, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody, I mean, we could follow whatever policy we want. I don't think that happens that often. I had one complaint where that was an issue. I think that the city going in and removing a sign, making a judgment that that person didn't want the sign, I mean, it leaves us so open. Somebody could say that you didn't like that candidate, or you were, I mean, it just seems like it opens up a whole new arena. But the policy can be whatever the policy that council wants, frankly, but I'm just recommending against it.
Well, I think the right-of-way is the right-of-way. If we say it's not to be in the right-of-way, you remove it.
Is that what?
Anybody else have a thought on that? Guess not.
No, I understand. I understand what John is, and that's one of my points, is if it's in the right-of-way, there's a reason you have a right-of-way, and that's for safety for utility workers. It's also, some of them along certain streets there's drainage areas, and I think they should be not located in the right-of-way. I think it's not, people should put signs on their own property. People should not put signs on other people's property or on city property. Someone goes and puts a sign in front of the Arts Center. What do we do then?
If it's our property, we would know to remove it.
No, but if it's in the right-of-way.
It's, well, the policy would be to move it back onto private property. Obviously, we're not going to move it back onto city property. We're going to remove it. But if it's, you know, it does happen quite often where people, the average person has no clue where the right-of-way is, and they do put the sign out, and they accidentally put it in the right-of-way. So we can certainly follow that policy, but we're going to be removing signs that people, well-intentioned people, put out because they wanted to advertise for their candidate.
Okay, so you've said that one case of that happening where the resident
Where
was
I'm
upset.
aware that somebody did not want the sign, or I had heard somebody did not want the sign.
So I'm not of the opinion that we should take something for one situation. I agree with the two, the way you've got it written, and it's kind of a middle-of-the-road approach.
I think it's trying to be middle of the road to take a stand for the residents. And I think that's what the residents would want, you know, rather than just saying. I agree with the law director that we could really get nailed for doing something like this because it's so unclear. But I think we got to stand for the public health, safety, welfare.
Yeah, we do.
Anybody else?
I mean, my only comment, I think, is, you know, I'm comfortable with going with number 2. And I appreciate, you know, Mr. Lobby's comments and knowing the craziness of sometimes courts and lawyers, no offense to you, Tom. But I just think as everybody I think up here is saying, for the residents, and so it doesn't get too out of hand or too crazy, I mean, I'll take the risk. And I think 2 makes the most sense at this point in time.
Okay. All right. So you'll bring something back next council meeting?
Yes, and I'll actually send something out right away so that everybody has it.
Can you send us a copy of the sheet that you have in the red with the time duration and that what you showed on the overhead?
Yes, I'll send that out to everybody by email tomorrow. Send out a hard copy so everybody has it right away.
Thanks,
Have
Rob.
A motion to have legislation prepared for next meeting.
Sure, we could do that. You want to make that?
Yeah, I'll make that motion to have legislation prepared to revise section 1288.04, item 3B, zoning code.
Is there a second? Okay, Mr. McGill. Any further discussion?
Can I add to John's motion?
Sure.
To incorporate section 2 of the
Incorporate.
options and conclusions.
Okay,
Rob
will you-
stated.
Include section 2 as proposed by the planning director.
Okay, will you accept that amendment?
I accept.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Brings us to item number 4.
An application for a liquor permit was received for Italian Villa Bar and Grill, LLC, doing business as Villa Toscano and Patio, 6200 Enterprise Parkway, Unit A.
Mrs. Meany?
Since there were no objections from any of the department heads, I move not to require a hearing.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. McGill? Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Crouch?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, item number 5.
Correspondence was received from Omni Properties Company regarding a proposed rezoning for senior housing for property located near the Cruzy Drive Bainbridge Road intersection. This item was referred to the Planning Commission and is still pending.
Thank you. Brings us to new, item number 6.
Ordinance number 2017-163, and ordinance adopting the annual appropriations for personal services and other expenditures of the City of Solon for the period January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2017, and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes, at our last meeting, a motion was approved authorizing the Director of Finance to amend appropriations of department budgets that allocated for funding of unfilled vacant positions. This ordinance amends the 2017 annual appropriation and shows the reductions to the department budgets. The Finance Director wants this done under emergency to submit the city's appropriations to Cuyahoga County.
Any discussion? I just have one question. Has this addressed the issue of the open positions that need to be filled?
Repeat the question.
Does this address the open positions that do in fact need to be filled in service
no,
and
this
rec?
is look at all the current unfilled vacancies and reduce budgets by the amount of appropriation necessary to fill those for the last 3 months of the year. So this is all departments that had any current unfilled vacancies as of the end of last month.
Okay, so there's vacancies, they're staying vacant.
Yes, correct.
But the
Yeah.
motion that was made was to exclude the police department and exclude a couple other things. Is this
I
incorporated?
provided this information to you, Councilman, and you affirmed that this is what you were looking for. So the exhibit that provided showed all the full-time vacancies that are included in the reduction in appropriation submitted to council.
Okay, then the next question is, what happens if a vacancy occurs between now and the end of the year?
We could come back to council and reduce budget further. So, for example, if a full-time position became vacant, we could reduce the appropriation in that particular department by the amount of the impact for the remainder of the year, so the effective impact. So if it's 2 months or 1 month, I can tell you I don't anticipate the administration is going to post for full-time positions until December 1st. That's according to my knowledge, but we could definitely follow up if something full-time is vacant in another department.
Okay. Mrs. Meany?
Because I know, Matt, you do have on here, a reduction with the police department and corrections. I think my concern. Okay, go ahead.
Well, you mentioned public safety, and I guess that was a question. That's why I provided this information.
Right.
These are not patrolman positions that
Right.
are currently vacant.
Okay.
And there were no vacancies in the fire department, so it didn't really meet the definition of. I understand police department is part of public safety, but that's not what our interpretation was when we put this together.
Okay. I guess, my only concern, and I know when this was first discussed, I think we were waiting for, maybe an opinion from our law director as far as whether council could do this. I mean, do we have the ability to say to the administration, I know we obviously have control over the budget, but do we have the ability to say, you can't hire somebody?
The only thing that council has primarily is the authority to fix the budget.
Okay.
I had difficulties by just having a blanket ordinance that says you're going to have a hiring freeze.
Right.
This is the one sacred area where you do have control of the budget.
Right, I
That is
understand that.
probably one of your primary issues.
Yeah.
And so you're not telling the administration they can't, but you're defunding some of these things, okay?
Right.
And that you do have control over.
Right.
Right.
I think, like I say, I have, some issues with that. I think just for the functioning of the city, say if we would need a lifeguard, say if we, or Bill needs somebody in service, as far as snow plowing. I mean, I don't want to see the residents get hurt. I know we're talking about, maybe just till December. But like I say, I'm not super comfortable in completely handcuffing the administration for positions that, may, in the end, I mean, I don't want to see that the pool has to close early because, a lifeguard quit and they can't get somebody to come in and hire somebody to take that position. Like I say, I'm dealing with a small, but like I say, I sometimes run into a little bit of being uncomfortable, that I don't want to see this in the end hurt the residents or, but like I say, that's basically my comment on this. And I guess my other question to you, Matt, you want this done under emergency, so you do want to vote tonight, or?
Well, as I mentioned, typically anything budgetary is normally per charter passed under emergency. So that's not different than any other appropriation amendment that would come before council. Typically, they are approved as an emergency.
I guess the only thing I really have an issue with the years I've lived in Solon, I don't recall this ever happening before. I just find this highly irregular, and really not going to vote for this tonight myself. Any other comments? Okay, is there a motion? Okay, there's a motion.
Sure, I'll make a motion. Adopting the annual appropriations for personal service and other expenditures of the City of Solon for the period of January 1st, 2017 to December 31st, 2017, and declaring an emergency.
Is there a second?
That's got to be under suspension.
Under suspension.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. McGill. Roll call under suspension?
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
No.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
No.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
No.
Doesn't go forward.
Mr. Scott?
Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott.
I'm sorry, Mr. Scott.
Yes.
Doesn't go forward. You don't have enough to waive it.
Doesn't have to.
Oh, you were-
Does it stay on,
First, it goes down to second
go
reading.
on a second reading then? Okay.
Okay, brings us to consent. Item number 7.
Resolution number 2017-164, resolution approving the admission of the municipality of Beechwood as a new member of the Norma Self-Insurance Pool Incorporated and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Kraus?
Yeah, this goes back to 1989 when Solon joined the Northern Ohio Risk Management Association for the purpose of obtaining property liability vehicle insurance and providing for a formalized jointly administered self-insurance fund. The members recently have recommended the admission of the city of Beechwood. They've undergone their own process that's nearly complete. Their city council has approved it. The Norma board has approved it, and for our purposes, the admission of Beechwood enables the current members of Norma to allocate the expected premium loss fund contributions among 12 cities. As a result of admitting Beechwood to the pool, Solon's share of policy year expenses would drop from 20% to about 17%, which decreases about $30,000 if Beechwood's included.
Thank you. Item number 8.
Ordinance number 2017-165, and ordinance waiving the competitive bidding requirement and accepting the quote of Parham Electric to repair/replace a damaged traffic control cabinet located at the intersection of Harper and Cannon Roads, declaring an emergency.
Mr. McGill?
Well, due to a recent traffic accident, which kind of obliterated this traffic control cabinet, we need to have an ordinance prepared and forwarded that we accept the quote of Parham Electric amount of $51,788 to replace that cabinet. This would also waive the competitive bidding requirement and is declared an emergency due to the fact that it is causing traffic problems right now.
Thank you. Item number 9.
Ordinance number 2017-166, an ordinance accepting the bid of Liberta Construction for the Bainbridge Road sidewalk project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Katora?
This legislation is being passed this evening as read in the title section. It's it says Liberta Construction DBA Chiaffi. That needs to be, the DBA needs to be removed under the title, and then again under section 1 where it says Liberta Construction DBA Chiaffi. The reason for that is there's two different companies. One is Liberta Construction, and then there is the Liberta Construction that does business as Chiaffi. This particular legislation approves the contract with just Liberta Construction. And on September 29th, 2017, there were 7 sealed bids that were received and opened for the Bainbridge Road Sidewalks Contract 2016.30. And Liberta Construction was the lowest and responsible bidder in the amount of $201,027. This legislation is also being passed under emergency so that we have an opportunity to begin the construction on this project before the end of this construction season. And it should also be noted that all of the references were checked and verified by the engineering department and were favorable.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve under suspension.
Is there a second? Mr. McGill, roll call under suspension?
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Final passage?
Mr. Katora?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to the end of our agenda. Now we have comments from the audience. Any comments from the audience? Please state your name and address, please.
James Orris, I live at 7648 White Oak Drive. I just had a comment with the political signs. I just think that if we look at it with just common sense, that might be a nice, safe road to go about. And I'm not sure if I heard it, what was the real issue, but I don't think anyone should have to worry about someone putting a sign in their yard. If no one has consent from the person dropping off a sign, maybe that can be included, that the person who's putting a sign in the yard should at least be the owner of the property, live in the property, or is the business owner. And when it comes to maybe like city properties, if the city's going to allow one, then they should either allow all of them, or city properties should just be neutral. Because I don't think that that should really be a real issue. I think when it comes down to it, people want to have the rights to express their own political rights, and I think that that's usually where they will do it in their homes. But if they're going onto someone else's property, they could be trespassing. So, then they could be in violation of going somewhere where they shouldn't. So as long as it's within common sense, safety, and, on their own property or someone who lives there, you guys might be okay. But again, I'm not sure, but that would just be how I would just want to put out there. So that's all.
All right, thank you. Any other comments from the audience? State your name and your address, please.
Sure. Michael Herman, Alshire Drive. With respect to the political signage, great comments this evening about the right-of-way issue. The only thing that comes to mind, though, is with respect to the illumination of signs, because you currently have an ordinance that specifies for subdivision signs what the requirements and limitations are as far as lighting it up. Number of foot candles from a certain distance, can't be seen directly from the household, things of the sort. And it would seem that that would be a reasonable restriction to place on any sign, not just a subdivision sign.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Okay, seeing there are none, we'll bring it back to the dais for comments from council, starting with Mr. Palunas.
I'd like to have a comment for the police chief and the assistant fire chief. First of all, I was at the Liberty Hill Park when we had an event there, and it was very good. There was a fire truck and police car, and everyone really liked it. And also at the certain council member went to go buy a pair of jeans over the weekend. And at Old Navy this weekend, there was a event in front of Old Navy where the police and Crime Dog were there, and the fire department. They had a lot of kids there, a lot of people there, and they were getting valuable information, and worked out well.
Thank you. Mrs. Meany?
I would like Mr. Dursick just to comment about when they're going to start doing the leaf collecting. I also want to commend him because the decorations outside, you know, I know it's fall and I love this time of year. I just don't love what comes after it. But, you know, it really looks really nice out there. So I commend Bill, whoever was in charge of setting that up. And I also just want to invite everyone. The Solon Historical Society is going to be having an event next Tuesday, October 10th, and it's soup night. And this is going to be the history of the Cleveland Mather family. And I think we all probably are pretty familiar with that name. They're a family that was very involved in Cleveland, and I think this should be a really interesting night. And I also, because he's been here for a couple meetings, I just want to call out Carrie Root, my outlaw, who is the president of the chamber. And thanks for coming. We appreciate having you here. And those are my comments.
Thank you. Mr. Scott?
No comments, thank you.
Mr. McGill?
A couple of things. First, I'd like to say congratulations to Jim McQuaid, the Solon High football coach. He achieved his 200th and 201st victories over the last couple of weeks. So congratulations to the football team, but especially to Coach McQuaid. That is a significant milestone. The other thing there, being at the game on Thursday night, I got to watch the band, and I have to admit, I was really impressed. That's a lot of kids, and the choreography was great. They're great musicians. The choreography is phenomenal, and I just can't imagine getting high school students of that age to do what they are doing. And anyway, it was very impressive. So if you have a chance to ever see that, please do. It's worth it. I also want to make a quick commendation to Energy Focus, which is a company here in Solon. On their own volition, they got together and pulled their employees and some of the other people associated with the company. They did a lot to get supplies down for Hurricane Harvey relief. So they did that on their own volition and did it privately, but I wanted to commend them for that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Couture?
I was going to say, how about those Cleveland Indians?
Yes.
They have provided us with so much excitement this year, and certainly want from the Couture household to wish them very well in the postseason, and really hope that this is our year. I have a feeling. Councilwoman Meany brought up the second point that I wanted to make was to ask our service director, Mr. Dursick, to comment about leaf collection. It seems like the leaves are not cooperating with us this year and are coming down at a very, they're coming down early and at a pretty good pace. So just wanted to hear from the service director about when the residents might be able to, what they should anticipate going forward with respect to leaf collection. And then I guess finally ask that we keep all of the people and families and loved ones that were affected by the devilish act of violence that took place last evening in Las Vegas.
Thank you. Mr. Cross?
Yeah, I just echo a lot of the comments tonight. Particular Mark's comment about the families in Las Vegas, all the people that had to suffer, all the victims, and all the first responders, the police, fire, paramedics, who all were very heroic in trying to save as many lives as possible. So those are my comments.
Thank you. And I have no comments this evening. We'll go to comments from the administration, starting with Mr. Loby.
I'd like to thank everybody at the table and Mr. Franklin about the good and prudent discussion on political signs. I really appreciate all of council's patience and attitude and discussion. Again, as your attorney, remember, I only give you advice as worst case scenario. Typical lawyer, I need to tell you what could happen, and then you could decide to take something from there a little better. I give you the floor issues so that if it does happen, which it probably may not happen, at least you have informed consent. I try to do that for you, and I really appreciate how this thing was roundtabled and where it went and how it was discussed and some of the things that were there. So thank you very much for your cooperation and your discussion here. I think it helps Mr. Franklin and I as we go forward on these very tough issues. Thank you.
Mrs. McConaughey?
I have no comments.
Chief Island?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Lieutenant Chivek?
I just wanted to make everybody aware that next week is Fire Prevention Week, and we'll be kicking that off here in Solon with our annual open house at the fire station on Sunday, October 8th. Starting at 1 p.m. We'll be open from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m.
kind of focused around the kids and giving them some fire education. So there'll be lots of activities. We invite everybody to come out and join us for the day and see our equipment and see the facilities. And we'll be at the Harper Road Fire Station. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rubino.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Mr. Franklin.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Mr. Driscoll.
No comments, thank you.
Mr. Jurczyk.
Yes, referring to Ms. Councilwoman Meany and Mr. Councilwoman Couture's comments, since we are having the early leaf fall this year, we're moving up our leaf collection to start on October 9th instead of the usual the 15th. You may see an occasional leaf truck out this week. We're doing some testing to make sure everything's up and running. So we will start that on the 9th. The city's website will be updated, and we will put it on social media so everybody's aware that that's going to be happening. A few other things to note: this is the first full week of the month, so it is household hazardous waste collection. So make sure you have all those things out at the curb. And the other thing I'd like to add too is fire hydrants are still continuing to be painted throughout the city through our contractor. Pettibone and Rolling Brook are almost complete. They should be moving on to Cannon Estates, Ridge, Pine, and Birch Circle, and then eventually Creekside. And then I will pass on the nice words that Councilwoman Meany said to the guys, Ron Herdesky, Anton Hannaford, and Jeff Pesic, and a little bit of Miss Erin Mix were helping out with the decorations out front.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Bush.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Okay. Mr. Lobe. What? You gonna make a motion?
I didn't think it was necessary. I thought it was determined it wasn't necessary. No, we need a motion.
Should be.
Just refer to finance director.
Yeah, just to refer
You
to
know, just
Refer to the finance department.
planning commission.
Finance.
I thought Mr. Bush said we didn't have to.
We're good?
I would like a motion on some of the matters we discussed.
Okay.
Well, at least one of the matters in executive session.
Right, I know, but who was gonna make that motion, though?
I mean, I can make the motion. You would like me to make the motion to?
Just refer to the finance committee for
Finance
determination.
Okay. So, the matter of Mr. Klotzman on landings.
Correct.
I'd like to make a motion to refer that item to the
Planning.
to the finance
Finance
committee
For finalization.
for finalization.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. McGill seconds. Roll call. Any further discussion? Bob,
I didn't think I needed to have a motion, but that's.
you're okay?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Do you want a motion, yeah?
Roll call, please.
Mr. Couture?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn? Okay, Mr. Scott, is there a second? Mr. McGill, roll call, please.
Mr. Couture?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Mr. McGill?
Yes.
Mrs. Meany?
Yes.
Mr. Palunas?
Yes.
Mr. Russo?
Yes.
Mr. Scott?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.